Close your eyes for a moment and picture life in the 1980s. Neon lights flicker in the night, kids pedal their bikes down quiet streets without helmets, and the evening news anchors beam from bulky televisions that sit like a piece of furniture in the living room. Back then, a gallon of gas was pocket change, a movie ticket was a few bucks, and most families could imagine owning a home without a mountain of debt. Now open your eyes and look around today. Gas pumps make your stomach drop. Streaming services and lattes quietly eat away at your budget, and buying a home can feel like chasing a dream that slips further away each year. We carry supercomputers in our pockets, yet so many of us feel more financially stretched, less connected to our neighbors, and more exhausted by the pace of daily life than our parents did. It raises the question, was life really easier in the 80s, or are we just seeing it through a nostalgic filter? On the surface, we enjoy things that people back then could barely imagine: instant communication, endless entertainment, medical advances, and safer, cleaner cities. But beneath the shiny convenience lies a truth that hits every wallet. Many of the basics of life, housing, healthcare, education, and childcare, have grown heavier and harder to manage. This isn't just about numbers on a receipt, it's about how money shapes freedom, how community defines safety, and how everyday rhythms influence happiness. In the 80s, you might have worried about high interest rates or saving for a rainy day. Today, it's navigating student loans, medical bills, and apps that constantly demand your attention. Different eras, different burdens, but both with lessons worth remembering. In this video, we're going to take you on a journey, side by side, through money, daily life, and community. We'll compare what things cost, how people lived, and what's been gained or lost along the way. By the end, you'll be able to decide for yourself, is modern life truly better, or have we traded too much for convenience? In the 1980s, the cost of daily living stretched differently across the household budget. Many essentials were cheaper, but much of what we now consider basic convenience either didn't exist or was priced as a luxury. Looking back reveals not just price tags, but different rhythms of daily life, how families entertained themselves, how they communicated, and how they consumed. Technology is one of the clearest examples. A 25-inch color TV in 1985 cost around $400, which would be roughly $1,100 to $1,200 in today's dollars. That was a big investment, and families often kept a television for a decade or more, repairing it if needed. Now, you can buy a 55-inch 4K smart TV for under $500, sometimes closer to $300. The screens are bigger, sharper, and connected to streaming apps. Where once a single TV in the living room gathered the family for primetime shows, today's households may have multiple screens, phones, tablets, and TVs streaming different content for each person. The price shift means technology is no longer a rare big-ticket item, but an accessible, almost disposable commodity. Computers highlight this shift even more. The first IBM personal computer in 1981 cost $1,565, more than $5,000 in today's money, while the 1984 Apple Macintosh launched at $2,495, about $7,000 today. At that price, a personal computer was an aspirational object, mainly for business or enthusiasts. By contrast, today, capable laptops range from $500 to $1,000, and even budget Chromebooks deliver more computing power than anyone in the 80s could have imagined. Smartphones put that power in everyone's pocket. What was once an expensive and elite purchase is now nearly universal, shaping how we work, socialize, and shop. Communication costs also illustrate how daily rhythms changed. In the 1980s, sending a letter meant buying a 20 to 25-cent stamp, roughly 60 to 70 cents today. People kept stamps in the kitchen drawer because written mail was routine, for bills, for invitations, even for catching up with friends. Long-distance phone calls, though, were a luxury. At around 20 cents a minute,
55 cents today, families budgeted their conversations, often limiting them to 5 or 10 minutes. Some people even made calls late at night to save a few cents. Today, the idea of rationing minutes feels foreign. With Wi-Fi and messaging apps, we can video call across the world for free. That change isn't just about money, it changed emotional rhythms, allowing families to stay connected daily in ways that once required careful planning. Travel paints a mixed picture. In 1985, a round-trip flight from New York to Los Angeles cost around $300, which is about $860 today. Airlines offered more services included in the ticket price: free checked bags, meals, and a more comfortable seat. Today, discount carriers sometimes sell that route for under $300, but travelers quickly pay for bags, food, seat choices, and even carry-ons. So while the base fare is cheaper, the experience can feel nickel and dimed. For many, flying is more accessible in raw dollars, but less glamorous, less comfortable, and more stressful. Entertainment has also undergone dramatic change. Renting a movie in the 1980s cost $2 to $3 per night, about $6 to $9 today. Families would drive to Blockbuster or a local video store, browse shelves, and hope the new release wasn't already checked out. It was a ritual: the car ride, the popcorn, the argument over which movie to pick. Today, streaming services offer thousands of films instantly for a flat monthly fee, sometimes less than what two rentals cost in the 80s. Convenience skyrocketed, but the ritual of renting and the social texture around it disappeared. Food and drink costs reveal how consumption expanded. Fast food in the 80s was cheap and simple. A hamburger for 50 cents, about $1.40 today, fries for another 50 cents, and a small soda. Portions were smaller, and the concept of supersizing hadn't yet taken off. Now, burgers typically cost $2 to $3, with combo meals running $8 to $10, and the portion sizes are much larger. Coffee shows an even sharper change. In the 80s, coffee was a 50-cent bottomless diner mug, equivalent to about $1.40 today. Specialty coffee shops existed in cities, but they weren't mainstream. Now, a latte or cold brew can cost $5 to $7, and coffee culture has become an identity. A daily habit that once cost pocket change can now drain hundreds from a monthly budget. Alcohol and groceries followed more modest inflation. A six-pack of beer in the 1980s cost $3 to $4, about $8 to $11 today. Mainstream domestic beer still falls in that range, but the rise of craft breweries pushed many four-packs to $12 to $16. Bread, milk, and eggs rose steadily, but unlike housing or childcare, they tracked closer to inflation. Families could manage grocery bills more predictably, even if other costs squeezed them. Shopping and services reflected a different consumer culture. In the 80s, repair was normal. TVs, radios, shoes, and appliances often went to local repair shops. Tailors, cobblers, and electronics repairmen were part of town life. Today, big box stores and online shopping dominate, and many products are cheaper to replace than repair. That shift reduced service costs, but eroded community connections. Travel and leisure planning shows the same arc. In the 80s, vacations meant calling a travel agent, receiving paper tickets, and tucking maps into the glove compartment. Planning was slower, more tactile, and filled with anticipation. Now, smartphones can book flights, reserve hotels, and guide us turn by turn. The efficiency is remarkable, but the sensory rituals, the folder with ticket stubs, the folded map with pen marks, have largely vanished. Everyday life itself felt slower. Payphones stood on street corners, and spare change jingled in pockets for emergency calls. Road trips relied on paper maps and sometimes getting lost. Families watched shows live on network TV, gathering at set times. Now, convenience rules. Everything is on demand, navigated by GPS, and delivered overnight. The gains are undeniable: efficiency, accessibility, and power at our fingertips, but the losses are cultural: patience, anticipation, shared rituals, and a slower rhythm that structured daily life. In short, the 1980s and today trade off in daily costs and conveniences. Tech, communication, and travel became cheaper and more powerful, while food, coffee, and services expanded into pricier lifestyle categories. What families spend money on shifted dramatically, and with that shift came new rhythms, faster, more efficient, but often less communal and tactile than the everyday experiences of the 1980s.
Rent was a burden in the 1980s, but it usually didn't swallow half a family's paycheck the way it can feel today. For many households back then, renting meant manageable monthly bills and the possibility of moving up to homeownership without decades of debt. That wasn't true for everyone, of course. Cities had tight markets and some families struggled, but overall housing prices relative to wages left more breathing room. Fast forward to the 2020s, and the math looks different. Rents and home prices have climbed far faster than median incomes in many places, turning what used to be a painful but doable expense into the largest and most grinding part of a monthly budget for countless households. Gasoline is a small but vivid example of how price perception has shifted. In 1980, gas averaged around $1.20 a gallon, which, when adjusted for inflation, translates to roughly $4 today, depending on the index you use. By 1986, it dipped closer to 90 cents, which would be around $2.70 in today's dollars. Those swings were felt, but families adjusted by filling tanks and keeping on with routines. Today, a sudden jump in prices is more likely to provoke a visceral reaction. Road trips get postponed, commuting costs get recalculated, and low-income households feel the squeeze immediately. The difference isn't just in the nominal numbers, it's that transportation costs now compete with larger monthly obligations like mortgage payments, childcare, and insurance in a way they didn't before. Higher education is another spot where the burden has shifted. Public college tuition in 1980 commonly fell between $1,000 and $1,500 a year. Adjusted for inflation, that might sit in the low thousands today, but the real-world result is stark. Many public institutions now charge $10,000 or $11,000 a year for in-state tuition, and the cumulative cost of 4 years plus living expenses can push students into heavy borrowing. In the 80s, parents and part-time jobs often covered tuition and living costs. Today, student loans are a near ubiquitous part of the transition to adulthood for many, and the repayment shadow can affect career choices, family formation, and long-term financial stability. Groceries and everyday food items tell a subtler story. In the 1980s, a loaf of bread cost roughly 50 cents, a gallon of milk about $1.80, and a dozen eggs around 90 cents. Prices that made regular grocery shopping feel predictable and budgetable for many households. Food prices have risen since, but not with the same ferocity as housing or childcare. That means families often find ways to trim grocery bills even while still struggling elsewhere. Fast food, however, moved differently. A hamburger priced around 50 cents in the 80s, about $1.40 today, offered an inexpensive, quick meal. Now, that same basic burger typically costs $2 to $3, and value menus have eroded. Grabbing dinner out can go from a small treat to a real monthly expense. Health insurance is where the numbers can be staggering. In the late 1980s, family premiums averaged roughly $1,100 a year, modest by today's standards, and often bundled into employment packages that made access simpler. Today, family premiums can top $20,000 or more in many employer plans once you factor in deductibles and out-of-pocket expenses. It isn't just sticker shock. The complexity of modern health plans, narrow networks, tiered pricing, high deductibles, means that paying for routine care can feel like navigating a maze. The 80s system was simpler in form, if limited in coverage. Modern systems deliver better care in many ways, but at a cost that has made healthcare the defining financial worry for growing numbers of households.
Mortgage interest rates in the 1980s were famously brutal. Double-digit rates of 12%, 15%, and sometimes even 18% were not uncommon. The monthly payments on loans at those rates were indeed steep, but the houses themselves often cost far less than comparable properties do now. That produced a trade-off: high financing costs, lower purchase prices, and the potential for rapid equity growth if wages and housing markets cooperated. Today's rates are far lower, mid-single digits in recent years, which reduces payment stress per percentage point, but sky-high home prices can make the total monthly housing cost much larger than it would have been in the 80s. Put bluntly, lower interest rates don't automatically translate to affordability when principal balances are so large. One of the more overlooked differences is how savings worked. In the 1980s, savings accounts and CDs often yielded 7 to 10% interest, returns that let people watch their balances grow without taking on much risk. That environment rewarded thrift and offered a predictable way to build emergency funds or a down payment. In recent decades, return on safe liquid deposits has been much lower, making saving feel like a slog. When the returns on basic savings are tiny and housing and healthcare costs are high, the natural buffering that families used to rely on becomes harder to achieve. Childcare illustrates the cumulative effect of these pressures. In 1985, childcare ran roughly $250 a month per child, about $850 in today's dollars by some measures. Now, parents often face bills of $1,500 to $2,000 per month for comparable care. That cost can easily eclipse the cost of living categories that used to seem insurmountable. It also reshapes family choices, pushing households toward dual incomes or bringing career decisions into conflict with childcare affordability. Putting it all together, the 1980s weren't without financial headaches, high interest rates, different kinds of insecurity, and regional disparities, but many routine costs were positioned relative to wages in ways that made paths to stability clearer for a larger slice of the population. Today, certain expenses, tech, many travel fares, and some goods are cheaper, but anchor costs like housing, education, healthcare, and childcare have outpaced typical incomes. That shift has forced families to prioritize differently, often juggling more bills, more complexity, and less predictable long-term growth from safe savings. The result is a new kind of squeeze, different from the debt and rate problems of the 80s, but every bit as real for those living through it. In the 1980s, life was structured by rhythms that leaned more on human connection and less on technology. Neighborhoods, schools, workplaces, and even public spaces were shaped by norms and habits that feel distant today. Safety, social trust, and daily community ties were handled differently, sometimes less formally, but often more personally. Over the decades, much has been gained in terms of health, regulation, and equality, but at the cost of certain rituals and connections that gave the 80s their character. Neighborhood life in the 1980s was often close-knit. Kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, playing kickball, stickball, or tag without constant supervision. Parents trusted neighbors to look out for one another's children, and it wasn't unusual for kids to drift from one yard to another without a text message or phone call. Block parties, potlucks, and community picnics were staples of summer life, while neighborhood watches relied more on actual neighbors than on apps or doorbell cameras. Today, community connections still exist, but they are mediated by technology. Ring doorbells, neighborhood Facebook groups, and next-door apps. These tools create a sense of oversight, but they don't fully replace the handshake introductions, the casual chats on front porches, or the shared sense of responsibility that once anchored local trust. Work and retirement highlight another social transformation. In the 1980s, staying with one company for decades was common. Loyalty between employer and employee was assumed, and in return, many jobs came with pensions, guaranteed monthly checks for life after retirement. Those pensions, paired with Social Security, provided a sense of long-term security. Today, job hopping is not only common, but often necessary to chase pay raises. Retirement savings have shifted to 401ks and IRAs, which are individually managed and subject to the ups and downs of the stock market. The sense of stability has given way to a sense of uncertainty. Workers have more autonomy, but they also shoulder more risk, and the promise of long-term loyalty has weakened on both sides. Public safety and regulation have seen some of the most dramatic changes. In the 1980s, smoking was nearly everywhere, in restaurants, offices, airplanes, and even hospitals. Ashtrays sat on office desks and car dashboards. Drinking and driving was often treated casually, with weaker enforcement and fewer cultural stigmas. Over the years, strong public health campaigns, new laws, and cultural shifts transformed those habits. Smoking bans pushed cigarettes out of most indoor spaces. DUI laws tightened, and public messaging made drunk driving socially unacceptable. The result? Fewer accidents, cleaner air, and healthier workplaces. These were major wins, but they also remind us that the 80s were more permissive in ways that carried hidden costs. Environmental consciousness also began to shift in this era. In the early 1980s, leaded gasoline was still in use, and CFCs in aerosol cans were thinning the ozone layer without much public awareness. Homes were draftier, cars guzzled fuel, and energy efficiency wasn't yet a buzzword. By the end of the decade, environmental campaigns gained traction, leading to the phasing out of leaded gas, the push for catalytic converters, and the first widespread recycling programs. Today, energy-efficient appliances, hybrid cars, and LED lights are standard. The air is cleaner, cars are safer, and homes are better insulated. But the new eco-friendly infrastructure also means higher upfront costs and more complexity for households to navigate. Childhood and education evolved dramatically in the 1980s. Classrooms ran on chalkboards, film strips, and overhead projectors. Teachers rolled televisions on carts into classrooms for special events. Kids carried heavy backpacks full of textbooks, and research projects meant hours in the library with encyclopedias. Outside school, children had far more unsupervised freedom: bikes until dark, weekend adventures in creeks and woods, and sleepovers with minimal parental hovering. Safety rules were looser: fewer seat belts, almost no bicycle helmets, and no child car seats for older kids. Today, schools run on smart boards, tablets, and Google searches. Children's lives are more scheduled: sports, music lessons, and carefully arranged playdates. Parents track kids' locations on apps, and safety regulations are strict. Modern childhood may be safer, but it is also more structured, less spontaneous, and often more pressured. Media and information access transformed community identity as well. In the 1980s, families gathered around the TV at 6:30 p.m. to watch one of three network anchors deliver the evening news. Morning newspapers arrived on doorsteps, and radio stations carried the day's hits and headlines. Information was slower, but it was also more unified. People shared common cultural touchstones. Today, news is instant and fragmented, arriving through social media feeds, podcasts, and niche websites. The benefit is immediacy and variety. The cost is the loss of shared experience. Whereas once a finale of a popular show was a national event, now entertainment is scattered across platforms and timelines. Culture and leisure held a tactile quality in the 80s. Mixtapes recorded from radio stations carried emotional weight. Sears wish books let children dream about toys months before the holidays. Families waited for photo prints from drugstores and flipped through albums together. Bowling leagues, church socials, and local clubs anchored social life. Today, those rituals are largely replaced by digital versions: playlists instead of tapes, Amazon instead of catalogs, Instagram instead of photo albums. They're faster, easier, and more customizable, but they lack the physicality and anticipation that once gave them meaning. The 80s and the present both reflect trade-offs. The 80s had fewer safety nets and looser regulations, but stronger community rituals and clearer social bonds. Today, we have longer lifespans, safer environments, and better protections, but at the cost of nostalgia-rich practices and the slower pace that came with them. Progress has made many things safer and more equitable, but it also replaced casual trust with systems, rituals with algorithms, and patience with immediacy. For some, the gains outweigh the losses. For others, the losses carry more emotional weight than the progress can replace.